let us begin. Once again, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Rossnagel, and I serve as Director of Communications for the Louisiana Conference. And we welcome you to today's meeting, today's webinar, based on the insurance crisis here in Louisiana. We have some great guests with us who will be shedding some light on these issues, shedding light on the insurance crisis in Louisiana, focusing on the unique challenges faced by churches in the Louisiana Conference of the United Methodist Church. Three distinguished guests with us who will guide us through this critical discussion, and we will take your questions. If you have a question, we encourage you to leave it in the chat, and we will hopefully see that question. If, however, we do not see your question or we don't have time for your question, we encourage you, and also if you don't want to leave it in the chat, you can email us communications@la-umc.org. Either during today's time online or afterwards, we will get an answer to you. Jeff Albright is our distinguished guest who will join us in just a minute. He serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of Louisiana. Van Stinson, who you all know is the Assistant to the Bishop here in the Louisiana Conference, and our good friend Chris Spencer from the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana. And we thank the United Methodist Foundation for partnering with us on this particular webinar and partnering with us on so many other things. So thanks to the foundation. As I mentioned at the top, our topic is the insurance landscape in Louisiana. And as you know, it is in many ways in trouble. Climate change has amplified the frequency and the severity of natural disasters, not only across the Gulf Coast, but across the world. Louisiana itself faces a unique challenge of severe hurricanes, coupled with substantial property loss across the coastline and throughout the state. In addition to that, our small insurance market, our weakened economy, and our high-risk industries only compound the issue. And we here at the annual conference, specifically district superintendents all across the conference, have heard from you, have heard some of the concerns, and have heard some of the questions that you might have with regard to this issue. And so that's why we wanted to get together what is in knocking on every proverbial piece of wood, a quiet hurricane season right now. And so hopefully that will continue. So we hope today is worth your time. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and we will post it on our YouTube channel after we are finished. So just in case someone from your church cannot be here today for this particular time, it will be recorded and you can share it with them at a later time. So with all of that being said, let me kick it over to Van Stinson with an opening word, if you will. And Van, I might put you on the spot and ask for an opening prayer here as we gather together. We see so many friendly faces here on the webinar. So it's great to see all of you. Van, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Todd. Good to be with all of you today. It was 2008, as I recall, and as I had the privilege of becoming Jeff Albright's pastor just prior to Hurricane Gustav. So I've known Jeff for some time. Jeff, in his role, to Todd's point earlier, as the head of the Louisiana Association of Independent Agents and Brokers, he gets this from the insurance side, but also he's head of the finance committee in his local church. So he gets it from the church side as well. And when Chris Spencer and I were talking some weeks ago about how we might best respond to at least begin this conversation, Jeff was one of the first people who came to mind. So I want to say a word of thanks to Jeff before opening us with prayer for his willingness to be a part of this, and what a gift you are, Jeff, to our state and to the church and to us today. So I'm grateful for your presence here with us today. All right, to Todd's point, let's begin with prayer. Gracious God, we are constantly aware of storms on the horizon, and yet we are also aware of your grace that is ever going before us, that your sustaining spirit that journeys with us, and the call that you place upon all of us and upon our lives to lead in these challenging times. Be with us during this conversation. May we sense the presence of your spirit, and may our hearts and our minds be open to the realities before us as we seek to join together and help one another navigate a difficult situation, but also explore the opportunities that we have to be more faithful in our response to you and to your call to be the church in the various places where you have appointed us. We ask all these things and trust in your presence in this moment. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Todd, you're muted.
Todd, we can't hear you, Todd.
Sorry about that. There needs to be a t-shirt. You're muted, Todd. That would be great. Chris Spencer, thank you for your continued support and your support of this particular topic. Give us a good word.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, all. Van alluded to some conversations that we've had, and we have those conversations go back a few weeks and months, and really some conversations that we've continued to address, knowing this need is critical. We know this is such a critical issue for churches in the Louisiana Annual Conference. From conversations that we have had with clergy and lay leaders around the state, we're committed to helping explore potential strategies and solutions in partnership with the annual conference and our churches to help best help our churches and however we can do that, and thinking in some ways outside of the box. Todd, you alluded to this earlier. This issue is not isolated to Louisiana. We've been in communication with other Methodist foundations, particularly our peers in the Gulf South area, to discuss ways that maybe collectively we could look to address the issue, and ways that they're working with their annual conferences as well. It's our hope that by bringing in industry experts like Jeff and considering some potential innovative solutions, that we can all play a role in helping resolve this challenge for our churches across Louisiana. And the foundation is here to walk alongside the annual conference and our churches as we move forward in hopefully looking for solutions that are going to help us address this tremendous issue for our churches across the state.
Thank you, Chris. And it is indeed an issue for all of our churches in Louisiana and across the Gulf Coast, but specifically here in Louisiana. So once again, as we send things over to Jeff to begin the presentation, just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, please place it in the chat. If you'd prefer to email, you can do so at communications@la-umc.org. And this session is being recorded. We do not anticipate taking more than an hour. The Zoom meeting is set for 2 hours, but we're going to take your questions, and we'll be here as long as we continue to have questions. So with that being said, Jeff, take it away. Tell us what we need to know. And I know you have a presentation on deck for us.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Todd, can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can. We're booking and cooking.
Okay, very good. So just as a very, very brief introduction as to my background, I've been an insurance agent for 45 years. I've been here at the association for 35 years. And one of the things that we do here at the association is try to work with the legislature, the Department of Insurance, and the insurance industry to try to maintain a healthy, competitive insurance market in Louisiana. In my 45 years in this business, we have never had a market as bad as it is right now. It surprises some people when I say, but it is absolutely true, that the market right now is significantly worse than it was in 2005 after Katrina and Rita, even though Hurricane Katrina is still the mother of all storms. As has been said, when I talk to my counterparts around the country, the market is difficult all across the country for all types of insurance, property insurance, whether it's homeowners and personal insurance, whether it's businesses or churches. Things are difficult all over the country, but it is significantly worse in Louisiana than it is in most places. And so I want to present a little bit of information to let you know why we have an insurance crisis. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some big picture solutions that our association and a lot of other business and industry groups are working on to try to make the Louisiana marketplace better. And then I'll finish with some specific suggestions for churches of things that you all may be able to do to help your situation. So just to get started, I've got a little executive summary, kind of the 30,000-foot view. Excuse me. Louisiana has an insurance crisis in two regards. We have a crisis of affordability. You all feel that very, very acutely. Insurance prices have jumped dramatically. In a lot of cases, property insurance and even other forms of insurance is becoming unaffordable. But the root cause of that is that we have a crisis in availability. There are a significant number of insurance companies that do business in Texas and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina and other Gulf Coast and South Atlantic coast states that do not do business at all in Louisiana. Louisiana and Florida, unfortunately, have kind of become the redheaded stepchildren for the insurance industry. Florida had a special legislative session in January, passed some massive reforms of their laws. And since then, they've actually had a few insurance companies go back to Florida. Louisiana, unfortunately, is really at the bottom of the barrel. The only long-term solution to improving the situation for affordability is to increase the availability of insurance. We need more insurance companies to do business here, to be willing to write coverage here. And insurance is a very, very competitive business. If your insurance company is solvent and it has reasonable coverage, you don't care who your insurance company is, you're going to shop for the best deal. And so if we can get a bunch of insurance companies to start doing business here, we believe in fairly short order that affordability will become much, much better. One of the big problems we have is that our legislature and our Department of Insurance have both for many years been hostile to insurance companies. They have had the attitude that we're going to beat insurance companies into submission. And the problem with that notion, and frankly, a lot of people think, we just need to make those insurance companies not charge so much. The underlying problem with that is you can't make insurance companies do business here. They get to do business where they want to do business. And as a result, they don't want to do business here. And we need them more than they need us. And so that's a fundamental problem. What we need to do is to change the laws in how insurance is regulated. And we have a significant tort problem in Louisiana. We sue people way more than other people in other states. And that obviously is not an environment that is hospitable to insurance companies and leads to the availability problem that I've described. So there are a number of reasons that the national insurance climate is not good. Climate change is a major, major problem. And frankly, it scares insurance companies to death right now. Obviously, we're having more frequent and more severe storms. Just big thunderstorms are causing significant losses in a lot of places. Hurricanes have become bigger and more severe. In 2020 and 2021, we had Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida. Laura and Ida were Cat 4 hurricanes with sustained winds of over 150 miles an hour. Those are the two most severe hurricanes in the history of Louisiana. And that the losses from those storms were 800,000 claims and $25 billion in paid insurance losses. The entire homeowners market in Louisiana is only a $2 billion market. The entire commercial market is less than $2 billion. So you're talking about $2 to $4 billion in annual premiums and a $25 billion loss in 2 years. That makes it difficult for insurance companies to do here. But it's not just a Louisiana or even a United States problem. Worldwide, catastrophes in the last 4 consecutive years were over $100 billion. Even for the big insurance industry, that's a lot of money. And in all of the years before the last 4 years, there was only one other year when catastrophe losses were over 100 billion. When it's 100 billion plus 4 years in a row, insurance companies hit the panic button and say, whoa, time to reel it in a little bit. We need to protect against some of this catastrophe risk. Insurers and reinsurers have suffered really significant financial losses. As a result of that, reinsurers, who are the insurance companies, or that insurance companies buy coverage from to spread their risk nationally and internationally, have paid historic losses. And so there have been dramatic price increases. And significantly, they are requiring the primary insurers take more of the risk, which then forces primary insurers to raise premiums both to cover their reinsurance premiums and to cover the additional risk that the reinsurers are requiring them to take. So nationally and internationally, the insurance market is difficult, but Louisiana has some very unique problems. Number one, we have the highest per capita incidence and severity of hurricanes of any state in the country, even more than Florida. We're a small insurance market. Again, our homeowners market is $2 billion. So when Hurricane Laura and Ida create $25 billion in losses, it takes 15, 20 years for insurance companies to begin to recoup that money. Florida is about a $20 or $25 billion market. And so a bigger market allows them to spread the risk better than Louisiana. We have a relatively weak economy, so it's not a robust opportunity for insurance companies in good times to make money. And we have a lot of high risk industries. I mean, the petrochemical business, agriculture, forestry, a lot of the things that we have here that are the foundations of our economy are not things that insurance companies are crazy about insuring. So again, the overall economic opportunity for insurance companies when the wind does not blow is not as strong as some other states. We have a very hostile tort environment. Historically, that's shown up in automobile insurance and liability coverages. Our accident frequency for automobiles is slightly higher than the national average, but we sue people twice as much as the national average. And that obviously has a negative impact on insurance companies if we're going to sue twice as much. And by the way, the amount of the damages that are awarded in Louisiana is almost twice the national average. Well, then it's pretty simple math to figure out that we're going to have to pay a lot more for our premiums. As I mentioned before, we have a negative legislative environment. Our legislature has felt like they need to pass a lot of laws in order to try to make insurance companies do what they want to do. And that sounds great. Yeah, let's make those companies, charge less for the premiums. You can't make them do business here. And so that's why they don't do business here. And again, I think one of the themes I would leave you with is we need insurance companies more than they need us in the state of Louisiana. So we need to try to attract them here. And finally, our Department of Insurance has historically taken a pretty aggressive approach in trying again to suppress insurance rates and make insurance companies charge less for their premiums. And if the insurance company can't get the price they think they need, They just don't do business here. This is a chart or a map from NOAA, and it shows catastrophe risk in the United States. The lighter the color, the less risk. The darker the color, the more risk that there is. You will note immediately that Texas, Louisiana, and Florida are the three states that stand out as having severe risk. But if you'll look at the notes on the right side here, the relative costs are acute in Louisiana as the population and economic size is much smaller than Texas and Florida. And Louisiana also has a high frequency of disaster events, which can lead to a compounding, cascading socioeconomic impact. This is not the insurance industry. This is NOAA's scientific evaluation of risk. Insurance companies know this, and it makes us a difficult place to do business. This is a graph of the net profit of insurance companies from 2005 through 2021. The line at the top here is break even. This would mean insurance companies didn't make any money, they didn't lose any money. Well, in 2005, after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, the $2 billion homeowners market was $9 billion in the hole. That's not an economic model that insurance companies can sustain. The wind didn't blow too much for a number of years, so they started to make a little money and they started to regain a little profitability. But net over these years, money in, money out, the best they got was at 2019, and the $2 billion homeowners insurance market was still $3 billion in the hole. They still have not made any profit in the state of Louisiana. Then we had hurricanes Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida. And now the $2 billion homeowners market is $13 billion in the hole. The reason I'm using homeowners insurance as an example is because it is largely written in what we call the admitted insurance market. That's the mainstream regulated insurance industry. Most commercial insurance, including churches these days, is being written in what we call the surplus lines or non-admitted market, which is the unregulated market. We can't get the same statistical data in that market that we can in the admitted market, but I assure you that commercial insurers, including church insurers, have similar loss history. Many of you know that Church Mutual, which was one of the biggest writers of church insurance in the country and in Louisiana, recently announced that they're pulling out of the state of Louisiana. They're not shutting down countrywide. They're pulling out of the state of Louisiana. And the president of that company was quoted as saying, churches in Louisiana sue Church Mutual on a regular basis, and they're done with Louisiana. So that's a problem for us. There was a report put out 2 years ago by 3 industry groups in the insurance industry, APCIA, the Reinsurance Association, and Bermuda Reinsurers. And it said 2 things. One is that natural catastrophe risk is increasing significantly, but they feel like they can manage that. What they can't manage is what they call social inflation. That's where legislation, regulation, and the courts are inflating claims, and the insurance industry feels like they cannot deal with that, and they singled out 3 states as the problem children for social inflation: California, Florida, and Louisiana. Florida largely solved their problems in their special session in January. California is still on the bubble because of their significant wildfire risk. We are still a significant problem, as I've been describing to you. So the crisis is real. One of the things that we talk about all the time is, frankly, people do not believe that insurance companies do not make lots of money everywhere, including in Louisiana. They just don't believe it. When they stop taking your money and leave the state, you can guarantee there is a real problem. If they were still making money here, they'd still be taking our money, but they don't. They don't do business in our state, which is the fundamental problem. So what can be done? On a global scale, there are a couple of things that we can do. First of all, in coastal states like Louisiana, we have to build more resilient buildings. There is a standard that was developed by the insurance industry called the fortified standard. It is basically a building code stronger than the normal state building code. We have a building code in Louisiana and it's very good, but it's not as good as the fortified standard. Buildings built to the fortified standard get somewhere between a 20 and 40% premium discount. So one of the things we can do is to make our buildings and churches stronger. If you can keep the roof on a building and there's a hurricane, losses are reduced by 70%. If we can reduce losses by 70%, over time, we can reduce premiums by 60 or 70%. So we need to build more resilient buildings so that we can reduce the risk to wind. The second thing, as I mentioned earlier, is the legislature needs to reform how they regulate the insurance industry. And the Department of Insurance needs to change how they regulate the insurance industry. And I am cautiously optimistic that our new insurance commissioner, Tim Temple, he had no opposition for election, so he is the commissioner-elect. He comes out of the insurance industry. He understands the insurance industry, and he has said that he wants to work with the insurance industry to try to bring them to Louisiana so we have more companies doing business, more availability of insurance, which over time will make insurance more affordable. And finally, the legislature needs to do some tort reforms to reduce the litigation across multiple lines of insurance, including property insurance, to reduce social inflation. But the question you're more interested in is what can churches do? There are several things. I represent independent insurance agents all over the state of Louisiana. And I love all my agents and I'm for all of them. But the reality of insurance agents, like anybody else, any professional or any group of people, some are better than others. Some have more insurance companies that they represent. Some have more expertise. Some have expertise in churches and others don't. So make sure that you have a good insurance agent who's working hard for your church to make sure they're doing the best they can for you. What does that mean? First of all, they ought to be doing some risk management with you and for you to try to reduce the risks for your church. There are a lot of different things that you can do on both the property and liability side to try to make your church safer and less subject to losses. So they ought to be talking to you about that. Number two, they ought to be reviewing your insurance program with you every year or two, maybe not every single year, but every couple of years. They need to be sitting down with you and going through all of the policies and all of the coverages on the policies, making sure you have the right coverages and that the amount of coverage is reasonable and appropriate, but that you're also not overinsured so that you're paying for some things that you maybe don't need to pay for. Number three, they need to be talking to you about deductibles and retentions. The higher the deductible, to some extent, the lower the premium. Now, there is a diminishing return at some point. At some point, an increased deductible doesn't significantly reduce the premium. But your agent ought to be talking to you about that and trying to find the sweet spot where you're taking as much deductible as you can afford to take while getting as much premium savings as you reasonably can. And the last thing they ought to be doing for you is every couple of years, they ought to go into the marketplace and see if there are other insurance companies that would be willing to write the coverage on your church, potentially the same or better coverages at maybe a little less premium. Frankly, right now, it's not a great time to shop insurance because, as I've been saying, there's not a lot of insurance companies that are wanting to write a lot of business. The exit of Church Mutual is going to put a lot of pressure specifically on church markets, but you need to make sure that you have a good insurance agent. As I mentioned, you ought to try to take as high a deductible as you can afford to fund and that gives you premium discounts, understanding that there is a diminishing return at some point in time. One thing that is not a fabulous solution, but something that if you can't afford the premiums, you may want to take a look at is, do you want to exclude wind and hail coverage from some of your property insurance? One of the things that a number of churches, particularly older, long-established churches have, is that they may have a bigger campus than what they really need, or if it all blew away, that they would rebuild if they were starting from scratch. And so obviously there are some buildings that are very, very important. Your sanctuary is critical to having a church location at that place. Administrative buildings are obviously, very important. But if you have some other buildings that, frankly, if it got blown away or burned down, you wouldn't replace, you might exclude wind and hail coverage for it, because wind and hail is about 60% of the premium. Or you might even consider not insuring some of the less important buildings on your campus. Now, again, that's going to vary a lot from church to church, depending upon what the campus looks like. But if you're really getting desperate with the cost of your insurance, there may be some things that you can do. I do want to caution that you need to be careful if you start taking coverages out of your insurance program. There are certain coverages that you don't want to do without. By law, you must have workers' compensation coverage to cover your employees. You need to have liability coverage so that if somebody slips and falls, or there's allegations of some improper behavior or some liability against the church, that the church is not all of a sudden liable for a big judgment in court and no insurance to cover it. And probably some of your buildings, like I said, your sanctuary, some of your administrative buildings, those that are critical to the function of your church, you probably need to keep property coverage on, maybe with some higher deductibles, as we've discussed. So those are some suggestions that we have. I will tell you right now, there is not a lot of room for optimism about our property insurance in the short term. It helps a great deal that, knock on wood, we have not had a hurricane in Louisiana this year, and really haven't had any significant storms in the United States. That helps the process, but it's our position, it is our opinion, that until the legislature does some things and the Department of Insurance does some things to open up Louisiana to make it more friendly to insurance companies, and we get more insurance companies to come into the state, it's going to be a difficult marketplace for the next couple of years anyway. With that, I'm done with the little presentation and happy to answer any questions and or throw it back to Todd and Van and Chris.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. Just taking notes here. 45 years, you never had a market like this, even post-Katrina, and those numbers that you shared in 2 years, 800,000 claims, $25 billion in costs, just staggering. In some ways, it's no wonder we are where we are. And I know I have a few questions. I know you probably have some questions if you want to leave them in the chat. Van, give me kind of just ballpark, or just give me an idea of kind of what's running through your mind. I did take a note about consider not insuring some buildings if churches are considering that. Your thoughts on that and what we just heard?
Yeah, and thank you, Jeff, for that. And certainly the conversation that we had in the last cabinet meeting with Bishop Williamston and the superintendents, leading up to this, that's a significant departure from what has been common practice in most annual conferences throughout the United States, but especially here in Louisiana. So that is a major departure, because at every, annual report, are your buildings insured, provide proof of coverage. But the consensus was around the table that we're in a new season now. And Jeff's recommendations might prove to be some of the best options in some situations. So I think that there certainly will be now grace granted in unique situations where either reducing coverage, not having wind and hail, or maybe not having coverage on some buildings, if as a last resort, certainly will be I say allowed. I don't mean that in a sense of how that could sound, but certainly, local churches are granted the leeway to respond in whatever ways are most appropriate and even possible, in the current climate.
Chris, your thoughts on what we just heard, and you've been you were one of the first people to talk to us about maybe having this. What did you hear and what stood out to you?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Jeff, great presentation. The numbers are certainly sobering. This is a conversation that this is certainly a need that we know at the foundation has been pressing for a while. And since I've stepped into the role as president of the foundation, and I've reached out, gone on some site visits to some other foundations in our jurisdiction and across the country, and this topic has come up early on with several other foundations because we all recognize this is a huge issue for us, and we want to help. We know we're limited in what we can do. For instance, one of the meetings that I've had is with my counterpart at the Florida Foundation, United Methodist Foundation. Florida is, as I understand it, man, you probably have more information on this in detail, but the Florida Annual Conference went down a path of looking into and creating a self-insurance pool. And that has become a tremendous problem and a tremendous issue for the Florida Annual Conference. So it's a challenge for us across the board. I think what Jeff recommended or pointed out, that until there's some legislative reform, until there is some Department of Insurance moves and changes, we really are in a difficult position collectively as we move forward. We want to help. We want to be a part of the solution, knowing that there are some tremendous challenges and headwinds that face us, not just related to what could come up from the Gulf.
I see there are some questions in the chat. If you all would like, I'd be happy to address those questions.
Yeah, that'd be great, Jeff. Some of them are in the same neighborhood, but go ahead.
Yeah, so Barbara Moller, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Barbara, asked, are there any real options for putting together weak and strong risk states to even out the insurance risk over more than one state? Insurance is regulated in every state separately by the state. Federal banks are regulated at federal level, but the insurance industry is a state-regulated industry. Each state regulates the industry within each individual state. And frankly, we've talked for years about trying to get a Gulf Coast, not just for churches, but a Gulf Coast property insurance collective put together, or even a national risk-sharing pool of some sort. And the problem with that is, frankly, states with less risk have no interest whatsoever in taking on the risks of states that have a lot of risk. If you're in Nebraska, you have no interest whatsoever in taking on Louisiana's windstorm risk. You have no interest in taking on California churches, wildfire risk. And so both from a legislative regulatory standpoint and from the practical reality of, are people, our businesses or churches willing to take on the more serious risks in states that have serious risk, that just doesn't work. Then there's a question by Bob Kimbrough. Have we considered hiring a lobbyist to push tort reform, or what can we do to do that? As you all, I hope, know, There's an election on October 14th with a runoff in November. Every elected official is up for election. We will have a new governor because John Bel Edwards is term limited. John Bel Edwards was a trial lawyer before he became governor. They are his people. We met with him before this last legislative session with some suggestions for solutions. And he told us at least 4 times in the meeting, I don't like insurance companies, I don't trust insurance companies, and I'm not interested in doing anything to help insurance companies. Well, that's fine, but that means they're not going to do business here. And as I've said, we need them more than they need us. It is most likely from the polling data I'm seeing that Jeff Landry is going to be the next governor. We hope that he will be supportive of tort reform. We expect the Republicans will have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate and will be business and reform oriented. So we meet, my association meets regularly with the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, which is the state chamber of commerce, the bankers, the realtors, and the home builders. Because if you can't get insurance, you can't build a house, you can't sell a house, and you can't make a loan on a house. We are all having, we all have our shoulder to the wheel, ready to do some significant insurance and tort reforms starting in March when the legislature meets. So there will be a major effort to do that. I'm not sure it's practical for the Methodist Conference to hire a lobbyist and have necessarily a political position on that. But certainly, if you all believe that this is part of the problem, as I have described it, as voters and constituents, you all can spread that word and talk to legislators and advocate on behalf of that. And then there's a couple of questions by both Bob and John Myers. Could we create a church captive or self-insurance cooperative or something along those lines? Van and Chris and I had a long conversation about this a couple of weeks ago. In this past legislative session, there was a law passed to allow churches to create a group self-insurance fund. There is a very large insurance brokerage that helped to push that legislation, and it's my guess that they will make a good effort to try to create a church captive. I would suggest to you that that is not likely to be successful because there are 2 things that every captive must have in order to be successful. The first thing is you got to have some deep pockets to be able to fund that captive, at least in the initial stages, because if you throw a few premiums in the pot and you have Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida with 800,000 claims and 25 billion, your ship is sunk. By and large, the United Methodist Conference and individual churches do not have deep pockets to fund the establishment of a self-insurance or group captive type program. But more importantly, the second thing that you must have to make a captive successful over time is you must have ruthless risk management. You have to kick out every church that doesn't take care of their business and make sure their properties are taken care of and that they're doing the things that they need to do to limit the risk in the pool. Because ultimately what happens is good risks pay for bad risks. Good risks say, that's too much fun for me, I'm out. And then all you end up with is bad risks, and then it falls apart. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. It sounds great and sexy to say, hey, we're gonna put all our money together and it's all gonna be great. And hey, we're churches and we love each other and all those other good things. But if you don't have ruthless risk management to manage the risk, you can't be successful. And then Kasim says, as a church, our social principles advocate for secure housing. How can we as the Louisiana Conference of United Methodist Church take the lead on advocating on behalf of the citizens of Louisiana to ensure the legislative body adopt legislation that is beneficial for the people of Louisiana? That's above my pay grade. I don't know if Van or Chris or Todd want to comment on that. That's not really an insurance question, so I'll leave that one on the table. Happy to answer any other insurance questions if there are any. Thank
you, Jeff. Appreciate that. And Van, did you want to take a crack at what Kasim is raising, which is a really good, valid point?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly I know and appreciate Kasim. I think he and I've had several conversations along this line. You know, back to Jeff's point, you know, as is always the case, you know, our social principles, our tradition has been heavy on advocacy for causes that have impact throughout the society and our community. So certainly assuming a role of advocating for the things that have a transformational difference in the lives of people, particularly those who are at a decided disadvantage, you know, already in these conversations. Certainly there is a role for all of us to play in that, but any coordinated or consolidated efforts, you know, certainly we as a conference have historically been open to that and would remain open to advocating for that. And, you know, to Jeff's point also, you know, responding to the question about hiring a lobbyist, I think clearly we have people who are lobbying for the types of change that will best impact the reality of our situation. Many of whom, some of whom are United Methodists, many of whom are dedicated church folks who are feeling the impact of this on both sides. So in some ways, I think that advocacy role and that lobbying role is currently being filled, I would say, with some confidence by folks who have ultimately the best interest of what we're looking for at the forefront.
Thank you, Van. Barbara did ask for Jeff's contact information. I'll leave that to Jeff if he wants to provide that. I don't want to provide it if he doesn't want to provide it. So we'll sync up after this, Jeff.
I'm happy for people to have that, Todd. I'm going to type it into the chat, but if you want to send it out in an email or something, that'll be fine.
That'd be great. I'll do just that. And in fact, if we could do both, that would be great. I did have a question. It's not necessarily in the chat, but it's just one that I wrote down as you were talking, Jeff, specifically about the fortified standard, building to the fortified standard. And if kind of maybe what is that? And could it potentially mean reduce costs? And then a follow-up question might be, is there anything you can do to an existing structure to make it meet the fortified standard?
So first of all, I mentioned earlier, but just to reemphasize, if you keep a roof on a structure, in a storm, in a hurricane where there's first wind and then rain, if you can keep the roof on and keep the roof sealed, you reduce the amount of the loss by about 70%. So it's a huge impact. From a premium standpoint, insurance companies usually give a discount somewhere between 20 and 40% if you are built to the fortified standard. And it's all about the roof. So there's several things that they do. Number one is they make sure that the roof is tied down securely to the structure. And that sounds crazy, but we've all seen pictures after a storm where the roof is gone. And obviously, if that happens, it's game over. The second thing is that the way they attach the roof deck to the joists is different. They use ring shank nails instead of ordinary nails, and they space them a little bit closer to make sure that the plywood deck stays on the joists, and so you don't have that problem. The third thing they do is they tape the seams between each sheet of plywood. So if all the roof shingles blow off, and I'm assuming here for a minute a shingle roof, a lot of churches or commercial construction don't have shingles, but you'll get the idea. The third thing they do is waterproof the deck. So if all the shingles blow off, the rain comes down, but it runs off the roof. It doesn't run between the seams and the plywood and create all the water damage to the interior of the property. For different types of construction, there are different standards, but that gives you a general idea of what it would look like. You can retrofit some types of construction to meet the fortified standard. And by the way, I have more information on residential fortified than I do commercial fortified, but this will give you, again, a ballpark idea. On an average roof for new construction for a home, it only costs about $3,000 to go from the building code to a fortified roof standard. So you'd be crazy not to build a new home, or frankly, a new commercial structure. I don't know what the relative values are, but it's relatively inexpensive to upgrade new construction from building code to the fortified standard. Retrofitting it is more expensive. What they do, again, I'll use a shingle roof because I have more information about that. Since you can't tear off all the shingles and put in new nails and tape all the joints, that's way too expensive. What they do is they go in the attic and they use what they call closed cell foam insulation. And they spray all of the joints and all of the plywood joints on the inside to seal all of the joints in the plywood and to adhere the plywood deck to the joists in order to, again, make sure the roof deck doesn't come off, and that if the shingles come off, the joints in the plywood are all sealed. They're just sealed underneath the deck instead of on top of the deck. So it's more expensive to retrofit, but it might be worth looking at least getting a cost estimate. But certainly any kind of new construction, I would advise anybody, whether it's a home or a business or a church, to upgrade your roof to a fortified standard instead of just the standard building code.
Thank you, Jeff. Didn't think I'd get into the weeds on plywood joints and joists today, but there we have it. Great information, appreciate it. Van, I know, Van, you had some kind of 5 tips that you wanted to share, kind of similar to what Jeff has laid out as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Todd and Van, if y'all were ready to go to the close, I just saw Donnie Wilkinson has another question. Would you like me to address that real quick?
Yes, absolutely. There's only so much refreshing I can do at this point. So
no
go
worries.
ahead.
So Donnie Wilkinson has a point. Broadmoor, Baton Rouge was forced to sue their insurance company after arson fires in 2020 due to the fact their insurance company refused to pay a just and fair settlement. They didn't want to sue. And his question is, what can churches do short of a lawsuit to ensure they receive just compensation when the insurer refuses to make a fair settlement? So first of all, I'm sorry you had that experience. The insurance industry, like any other industry or group of people, sometimes has a few bad actors in it that create bad situations. There are several things that you can do short of a lawsuit. First of all, virtually every property insurance policy has what's called an arbitration provision in it. So if the insurance company says your claim is worth $100,000 and you and the contractor that you're talking to about doing the repair says, there's no way we can fix our church for that. It's going to be $500,000. And you go back and forth and the insurance company is just being unreasonable, then the church can invoke the arbitration provision, which allows the church then to hire their own adjuster or appraiser to come in and value the loss. They do just like the insurance company appraiser. They look at the damages, they do estimates of what it's going to take to repair it, and the two appraisers negotiate with each other. And your appraiser will be better positioned to help negotiate with the insurance company than you probably are, because you don't have that expertise.
Right.
If your appraiser and the company appraiser can't come to a settlement that you think is fair, then you can invoke an umpire provision where a neutral third party umpire is added to the mix. So now you have 3 appraisers looking at the damages and what it cost. If the neutral appraiser agrees with the church that it's worth $500,000, then the company should pay $500,000. The other thing that you can look at is that, particularly after hurricanes, the Department of Insurance has frequently, after the last several hurricanes, created a mediation program. And the whole idea behind a mediation program is you need legal help, but you don't want to hire a lawyer and pay that lawyer 40% of the damages. And so you go to mediation, and a mediator is appointed by the court. It's usually a lawyer or a retired judge or somebody who has a legal background, and he hears the arguments from the insurance company and from the church, and he mediates the claim. And in the end, he says, I think you should pay $100 or $500 or $425,000. And insurance companies will normally follow what the mediator suggests, because when you get to a lawsuit, if you end up in a lawsuit and the insurance company has not done what an appraisal mediation or a mediator has suggested, the insurance company is going to get hammered by the court, and they know that, and they don't want that to happen. So whatever that's worth.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Just a reminder to everyone that we are recording this, and we will post this on our YouTube page at its conclusion a little bit later. And of course, we'll email it out to everyone in a Louisiana Now email that should go out to everyone. Don't see any more additional questions. If we missed your question, send us an email. We will get that, and we'll of course send along Jeff's contact information. He was very kind to give us his cell phone number. So I don't know if it's his cell phone number, it may be his office number, but Jeff, thank you for that.
That is my cell phone number, and I'm happy to talk to anybody, subject to the schedule.
Absolutely. Thank you. So thanks for joining us. Van, Chris, maybe some closing comments from you. Van, I know you've been paying attention and maybe have some tips on what we can have going forward.
Well, I mean, yes, and thanks to Jeff for this. I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, hopefully this will establish the conversation as an integral part of kind of what this next season, as we navigate this together. It's the outlook can seem rather bleak, but I'm grateful for Jeff to give us at least some points to help navigate what is an otherwise pretty untenable situation for many. His points of the insurance agent and the role of that being crucial. I just know from experience that oftentimes that relationship has been in place for some time and may not necessarily have been, monitored and evaluated and kept up as it should have been. So that is an important reminder. Looking at reductions in premiums, increasing deductibles, considering the situation of, not insuring certain buildings, or maybe even considering not having wind and hail. What disaster preparedness and risk management might look like. I mean, those are just practical ways that we could potentially address the reality that certainly is not offering us very many options. I do want to, before I pass it to Chris, one of the difficulties that we face, from a conference and foundation, partnership perspective, is that there's so much we would like to do, and yet so little we can do realistically. And what we're learning, particularly from our friends and colleagues in Florida who did take the step some years ago to move to a self-insured property, and liability coverage, that looking back, that was not a good move for them. And, they have found increasingly the challenges that Jeff alluded to, that you have to have an incredible amount of capital to make sure that will work. And you also have to be, at times, very unchristian and unchurch-like in managing your risk. So it's a difficult situation, but they are certainly helping the rest of us know what pitfalls to avoid. But we'll continue to monitor this, keep you aware of new developments. Certainly want you to continue to reach out to us. I mean, This is it's a real issue for all of us, and the more we can collectively explore possibilities and options, I think the better all of us will be in the long run. So, Chris, thank you for your willingness to engage in this conversation, and want some thoughts from you as we wrap up.
Yep, for sure. Thank you, Ben. I echo what you said. We want to help. We know we're limited in what we can do resource-wise, but I think this is an opportunity for us collectively to come together with experts like Jeff and perhaps others around the annual conference that would be willing to come together on perhaps an insurance task force or some small group gathering where we collectively continue to continue to think of outside the box options that might be solutions for our churches. Not sure what that looks like, but I want to go back to something the point you just made, Van. This is I think the opening conversation of what we can hopefully do together to partner and address what is such a critical issue for so many of our churches, front and center for so many of our churches, as we hopefully have another quiet season. Todd, you alluded to knocking on every piece of wood you can find earlier, but I think that would be the best case for us this year as we continue to try to tackle this issue collectively going forward in partnership.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Chris.
Hey, Todd, one last
Yeah.
point I did want to make, because I was sort of looking at the faces on the screen.
Sure.
For a number of years, we have assumed that this was primarily a South Louisiana problem.
Yeah.
And typically it in terms of impact, it often is. But this is a reality increasingly for the entire state. Who would have thought we would have wildfires in Louisiana to deal with? That's a California thing, right? But
And who would have thought
storms,
California would be dealing with a hurricane this year?
there you go. It's just a strange world in which we live. But this is, and I think I would like maybe one last word from Jeff to sort of frame that this is not an isolated issue for one part of the state, for just below Interstate 10. I mean, this is a statewide crisis that we all are dealing with, regardless of whether we're in Shreveport, New Orleans, or, on front and center in Lake Charles, or in Bastrop, in the Northeast part.
No, I would echo exactly what you said, Van. My agents in North Louisiana are having just as much problem. I mean, it's a little worse in the greater New Orleans area, but it is absolutely a statewide problem. And when I said that this is the worst market I've seen in my 45 years, that's part of what I'm describing. After Katrina and Rita in 2005, South Louisiana had a significant problem, but North Louisiana rocked on. But my agents in North Louisiana are telling me I got no markets. And when Church Mutual pulled out, all the agents statewide were hitting the panic button about, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with these churches that I have in Church Mutual? They're a big market. So it's a significant problem across the state.
All right. Thanks again, Jeff. Really appreciate it. If we all could give Jeff a virtual round of applause, a thank you for carving time out of his schedule to join us here. I know everybody here is very, very thankful, Jeff, for your insight and your continued partnership as we move forward. So thank you again for that. I don't see any additional questions. Again, if you do have a question, please email it to us, communications@la-umc.org. This session will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel as soon as we are done, which we have come to that point in the meeting. Van, if I could get you to bookend us with prayer and close us out with a good word. And thanks again to Chris, Spencer, and his cooperation. And of course, our thanks to Jeff for his insight and analysis. Van, take us home.
All right, let us pray. Gracious God, for the gift of this gathering, we offer you our thanks and ask now that your blessings would be upon us as we depart from this virtual gathering to continue to do the work you have called us and sent us to do. Bless us in all moments. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day and a great upcoming weekend. Enjoy the cooler weather. See you, everyone.